I served in the Marine Corps from 2009 till present. I'm currently a major stationed at the Communication Directorate in New York. We are Communication Strategy and Operations Office. I didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of high school. My family has multiple generations of Navy, and so I ended up at the Naval Academy, sort of, I don't want to say a whim, but didn't know what I was signing up for. My senior year, the realization that I had to pick a service came up, and the Marine Corps has more civilian applicable jobs where we kind of encompass the spectrum, whereas if you're Navy coming out of the academy, you have to serve on a line as a line officer. So didn't really want to drive a ship or fly a plane, and the Marine Corps had public affairs, so I got very lucky that I got my first choice. Actually, I think my most memorable experience would be as a first lieutenant. I was stationed out in Okinawa, Japan, and I had been doing an exercise in Korea at the time. We were literally flying back from South Korea to Okinawa, and when we landed on the flight line at Kadena, the tsunami warnings were going off, that the tsunami had hit mainland Japan and the Tokyo area while we were in flight. And so within 24 hours, they got us off the aircraft, repacked. I boarded up on a CH-46 and went with the helos back up to Sendai, Japan. And for almost a month, we delivered food, supplies, gas to these remote areas of Japan to make sure that they could stay warm. In the midst of the tsunami, snowstorms happened. It was sort of a freak of nature that happened. But getting to see how respectful and resilient the Japanese people were was really eye-opening and rewarding to be able to help them. It was challenging. The Marine Corps never taught us how to work with translators, so we sort of had to use hand and arm signals and body symbols, and if we were lucky enough to have an actual translator with us, that was very helpful. But for the most part, we would land in like a baseball field outside of a school, and some of the self-defense force troops would come running up, and we would hand off whatever it was that we were bringing them, and then we'd be up and on our way to the next place. I served in Afghanistan, down in Helmand Province with Regional Command Southwest. That's a long story. I've also done a tour in Kuwait and Iraq and the current Operation Inherent Resolve campaign, as well as a ship deployment on the USS Kearsarge in the Persian Gulf. So when I arrived in Afghanistan, I was on the backside of the surge troops. President Obama's surge campaign was coming home as I went out in August 2012. So I replaced 3 lieutenants that I then had to fill in their job. But part of my job was to actually mentor my Afghan public affairs counterparts, that they had like this media wing, except that my Afghan counterparts refused to speak to me, and they wouldn't look at me. So I would walk into a conversation where they would do something, and then all of them, they would all turn their head away. So actually I had a male sergeant who had to take on my mentoring responsibilities because they refused to work with women in the part that I was in. It was frustrating, obviously growing up in America, and also just my family dynamics of like, you can do whatever you want to do. Nobody's ever going to tell you no. And then for me specifically, I sort of took it as that's their culture, and we're not there to change that aspect of it. And it is obviously important that women in Afghanistan have human rights and that the girls get to go to school, but me trying to exert on them that they need to respect me as a woman and as a Marine isn't going to accomplish any of those things. So it was kind of a balance of acceptance and not fighting a battle that I wasn't going to win. That I know in future rotations, I've had female counterparts who were actually able to do those roles. So either there's progress or just different people interpreted their religion differently. I embedded all the journalists that came into Helmand Province at the FOBs with the grunt units, and I was able to make sure that the American people could see what we were doing and where we were in the campaign at that point in time. So I think I made an impact by telling the American people what was happening. I just was unable to contribute to the Afghans' individual professional performance. It was challenging. Obviously, there's a storyline that a lot of reporters come in, or at least the story they expect to tell, and trying to convince them that this is the story that we're telling, or this is what is currently happening. They would come in wanting to see action and combat and go on patrols. And at that point in time, we were transitioning most of the missions to the Afghan troops. So unless they were willing to go with Afghan soldiers not accompanied by coalition troops, what they were going to see was more of just the internal training at the FOBs or security from those locations. So it was always sort of a battle of what the Marine Corps wanted to say versus what the individual journalist thought they were going to say. But in the end, I think we would put out press releases that would talk about, how many schools had opened or how many IEDs had been cleared, and metrics that the military had decided were important. And it was also sort of important to make sure that you address the journalists' concerns, because that was what people are asking. Like, well, so what that you open this school? Are there kids in the school? Do they have teachers? That sometimes made you take a step back to be like, oh, of course, these are, it's the bigger picture than just, military breaking it down to bullet points. Looking at the way that the journalists wanted to present it, I was obviously professionally frustrated sometimes when I felt like I wasn't being heard with the information that I was providing, or I would come up against things that were classified and I couldn't tell them or couldn't explain to them why something was the way that it was. In some cases, I would get permission from a general officer to show them a classified map or something and just make sure that they understood that they could not publish those specific things. But I ended up working with great journalists who did respect. We didn't have any issues with them. There's the infamous examples of them drawing maps in the sand trying to convey things. And I never experienced any of those things. Being a female in the Marine Corps, times have changed significantly, even since 2009. Actually, when I went to the Naval Academy and I was applying for a nomination for my senator, he had asked me what I wanted to do, and having really no background in the military, even though my parents were both in the Navy in the 70s, I told him I wanted to be on submarines, and he kind of chuckled and he was like, you can't do that, right? I'm like, well, no, but I'm going to be the first one. And thought that I was like, as long as I charge headfirst into this, I'll get to do what I want to do and I'm going to make a difference. Transitioning from a midshipman into the Marine Corps, I think we sort of had set expectations. They started the process to allow females onto submarines the year following my graduation date. So that was not eligible. I would have made a terrible submarine officer, so that was a good thing. I think the changes have sort of been a challenge because I came in with set expectations and standards, and they're changing. And so, a small example, but I came in and part of my fitness test was I was required to do the flexed arm hang for 70 seconds. And 3 years ago, they changed that, and now I'm required to do pull-ups. And I've never been required to do a pull-up in my life. So obviously, we are expected to adapt and overcome. But some of us, I know the junior females who are coming in now are really excited about some of these new standards. The rest of us are like, well, I was really good at those ones. That our uniforms are changing. That it's little things that you're kind of like, well, that was female history. We just recently hit 100 years of women in the Marine Corps, and there was tradition, our own traditions behind these things. But you know what? I've come to grasp with it that there is probably a woman out there who is tough and the fittest and can keep up with special force guys. That's not me. I have no desire to do those things. What makes me good in communications is not necessarily what's going to make a MARSOC Marine good at his job. So you have to have a balance. And if the previous policy was an end-all be-all, like based on your gender, you may not do that, then let's open it up and let that one woman who can do it, if she can make the standards, have access to that. Thankfully, I don't think that they will force me into any of those roles, and so I will happily stay in my current role. I think it will be beneficial for the Marine Corps to have the different perspectives that come. I know it's sort of cliche, but they always joke about like women work smarter, not harder. And when you're faced with carrying very heavy combat loads, a person who is not just pure muscle has to come up with a different way to do it. So I think it will be great in the long term, as long as the Marine Corps doesn't apply quotas to it. I mean, I think transition is scary for everybody. And I thought about getting out about a couple years ago. 1 year ago, I was leaving Camp Lejeune, and had just sort of been tired of the Marine Corps telling me where to go and when to do it, and specifically the moves. And I managed to convince them to send me back to New York, where I was from, to kind of have some time to reset. And I've been thinking about getting out again, and now the economy has taken a dive for the worst, and there's safety in the military, that I have a guaranteed job. There's safety in routine and the benefits that are provided. And having never interviewed for a job in the civilian sector, the prospect of getting out and trying to find something, and I think the most scary part is just the opportunities are endless. Like, how do you narrow down what field I want to go into? I'm probably best qualified to do some sort of public relations, but because of my education and career, the Marine Corps told me this is what I was going to do. My degree is in quantitative economics, and I have nothing in paper that says that I'm qualified to do communications, shy of experience. But I think just knowing where to start when you get out is kind of a roadblock that the safety of the military. Like, okay, well, I'll stick it out for a few more years.